at and review the failures of our historical safety management approach. So for many of us that have been in the safety field over the past few years, we've seen a tremendous change and a need for change in the way we manage safety. And this is where this came about, where a lot of work was done over the last 14 years in terms of looking at how we do our business and how we can actually improve in terms of the safety management system. We're also going to be looking and discussing the leading indicators. Now, many of you are familiar with leading indicators in terms of what you are using within your organizations. But it is important for us to look at the process from the learnings that we gathered over the last 14 years when we worked with large projects, in terms of the lessons that we got from the projects and the focus areas. And by implementing these focus areas or leading indicators, it gave us a better picture in terms of where we were. Then we'll also be looking and discussing how these actually gave us the opportunity to predict the incidents and prevent them from occurring. And we had, for example, numerous discussions in terms of the current or previous way we looked at incidents from indicators. And I'll talk a bit about that in the following slides. We're going to be looking today at just the one set of the metrics called safety drivers. Safety culture and the common practice element will be discussed later on. And then also, if you look at the slide, you'll see that there's a topic called the balanced scorecard approach, targeting specific safety improvements. If time allows me, I'll just touch on the subject. It's also a key discussion for us to hold in terms of what scorecards are we using? What input do we have in terms of developing these scorecards? And more important, what value are these scorecards bringing to our business in terms of improving safety in the workplace? Next, Fabian. Sorry, and I must apologize. Fabian is helping me because my system crashed, and I think someone's mic is on, and just for the purpose, if the only person's mic that can be mine and Fabian's, and if others can go to mute, please. Okay, next, Fabian, can you change the... Okay, so we looked at, in terms of the bottom side, the triangle, we had a number of ways, and unfortunately, we still use these processes from the various theories that were developed over the years in safety. And we've seen that although we have this Heinrich or Bird's theory, we were experiencing some flaws in that the numbers didn't add up. You know, that if so many near misses, then you'll have 0 recordables, or you won't have a fatality. Unfortunately, what we did experience is that our bottom lines were good in terms of the number of near-miss reports. But we were still experiencing serious hypertension incidents. And on one of the projects, we actually had like 3 or 4 fatalities. And this was surprising because we had robust HSE management systems, at least we thought. And this brought us back to the drawing board in terms of studying what are we actually tracking and monitoring. And this gave birth to the area of focusing on a number of leading indicators that we'll be able to monitor more efficiently, because we found that the safety metrics that we were using were reactive. So, for example, if I had a large number of near misses reported, they weren't categorized into the potential or high potential categories. As long as they were coming in, they were basically tick the box to say, yes, we're reaching these numbers. So we're actually on track. And surprising enough, we also, in the study, looked at the near misses that occurred with the potential of the hertz. And that is another totally different area in terms of we would like to share with our members in terms of what did we learn when we did the study of mining the diamond. It was a good study done also, and kudos to the guys at ExxonMobil, the offshore teams. They did a lot of work, and when we introduced it into the projects, we actually were alarmed by the areas and items we were missing. The essentially failure metrics also is that we also had experienced very similar to what happened at the BP rig disaster, is that on 2 or 3 projects, we had excellent records. So we had, on one project, we had 18,000 workforce. On the other one, we had 30,000. And we were recording man hours like you could not believe. And we were actually celebrating these. But little did we know that this was actually gearing us up for some significant learnings. And we want to do more from the traditional way of measuring. And this, again, came back to the leading indicators. So we moved out of the traditional safety process. And it took a lot of convincing. And one of the important parts, and why I'm saying it took a lot of convincing, I find that the more you try and introduce new initiative or creative approach to safety, we tend to be pushed back into it's not the way we do business around here. And I'd like us to look differently at safety, to be, I know a lot of us don't like the word, but be disruptors in safety. And it's key because we can only learn and from moving forward. If we stay back and just do the same things we did always, our learning is not going to improve. And COVID-19, the pandemic, is a clear example of how we fail to learn and implement our processes. So Fabian, go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to look at the safety drivers into this morning's discussion. And that's one of the major set of metrics that we had developed. The second one is around the safety culture. And safety culture is a massive item to discuss. And there's a lot of differences in terms of what is a safety culture, how do you measure safety culture, etc. And then the third one was around common practices. What are common practices? How are we ensuring that they are robust for the business? Next, Fabian. So on safety drivers, these 5 key areas, and they mainly came out from workshops. Our incident, we had over the various projects looked at a gap assessment in terms of, although we have the training, we had the supervision, we had a very top heavy project management leadership team, but where were our gaps? We looked at the conditional controls that were in place. We looked at our onboarding practices. It was a dynamic projects. So we were getting in a lot of people that were first timers to construction. We were also getting the old hands. So this presented a number of issues. And for us, the surprising one was around knowledge skill building. And this was not unique just to these projects, but it's something that I've picked up over the last 27 years, is that we assume that we have a strong knowledge retention. And unfortunately, on one of the projects, we actually ran what is known as a knowledge retention program. And we were alarmed by the results. So I'm going to start off just by the leadership side. So we as I mentioned, we had a very strong project managed leadership team. And this was also cascaded down to our contractors, subcontractors, second and third tier contractors, subcontractors. But the gap we had was that the leadership were actually project leadership and not demonstrating safety leadership. And when we spoke at length on this, there was this resistance in terms of saying, are you saying that we are not committed enough to safety? And we were fortunate that there was, stay back on the previous one. Yeah, so we were fortunate on the leadership side to get buy-in from shareholders and some of our client management team. And this led to personal safety leadership plans. It led to strategic workshops. It led to our actual senior leadership being in the field, so boots on the ground. And this cascaded such a strong message to the site, to the field teams. And immediately when we tracked leadership commitment, we had to, for example, we all developed plans, personal safety leadership plans. We share these and we actually display them in our offices. So when you walked in and out of your office, you actually basically were looking at your leadership plan. And we encouraged, as project management teams, we encouraged the internal review process in terms of mentoring, coaching, supporting each other. So from a leadership role, I was very fortunate to have mentors that had vast years of experience in terms of not just safety, but project management, financial management, leadership skills, quality management. And this is key for the safety professional. Don't look at safety just as being a guy that's going to go and tell people to wear PPE. You're part of the leadership team. So for many of us, we need to start looking at how do we add value as the leadership team. And typically in today's scenario, we have this around where as safety, everything is starting and ending with safety or the safety professional. I'm still alarmed to see how the safety professional is taking on so much and not leveraging off the teams that are at their disposals. So on leadership, and I'm talking from my experience, I leverage off everybody that's in the leadership team. I don't know everything. I'm one link in the chain, and that's how you bring value to the table. It also has, from a leadership part, it has a major part in terms of driving initiatives. And as a safety driver, this is where we actually got buy-in when you share these type of informations with managers. When you try and do it all on your own, you basically can lose credit if it doesn't work out. You also then get told that you don't have buy-in. And this was coming back to our second part of the safety drivers. One of the major successes was on our supervisory site team level, the supervision. We failed in so many ways in terms of our supervision and how we actually geared our supervision up for the job. In terms of all our industries, and I'm talking again from the experience of work in oil and gas, petrochem factories, you find that supervision or the supervisors, foreman, chargeman are actually promoted based on their years working with the company, to a friend of a friend of a friend, a family member, but they're not given the tools to actually supervise. So when we went through the process of looking at what's needed for supervisors, we saw a major opportunity in terms of the training aspect, and it's linked to onboarding and knowledge retention. So for example, on one of the projects where we ran this knowledge retention, we actually were alarmed that our supervisors had a retention of 45%. Okay, so it meant that a large percentage of our supervisors were actually supervising their jobs by luck. And when you look at a good tool for this is your taproot or root cause analysis. So a lot of this came out, as I mentioned, from workshops, but it also gave us insight into our gaps that we had from our repeat incident and our investigations. The supervision element also looked at in terms of their engagement. We also, by leadership going to the ground or boots on the ground, we found that a lot of our supervisors were not engaged with the workforce. Sorry, I'm getting some disturbance. I don't know if someone's video's on or mic, but we found that the supervisors were not actually leading the pre-task. They were not leading the pre-task safety talks. We also found that they were focused mainly on work activities, and the communication was one way, and most of the communication, unfortunately, again came from the safety officers, and this was a major setback for us. So it took us time in terms of workshops, again looking at the knowledge skill building of the supervision. The conditional control is measured mainly at safe versus unsafe conditions. And for us, we had failed in terms of, we were doing a lot of measuring. We had a lot of audits in place, but we didn't do anything with the programs. So we were basically having a system that ticked the box. So as an example, on the projects, we looked at the safe, unsafe conditions. And when we looked at it, we tend to also look mainly at unsafe. And we had the opportunity to tap in also to those people that were working safe and leverage off that in terms of what separates the safe from the unsafe. Can these guys be our role models in the field? And we leveraged off those areas in terms of the conditional controls. Now, and later on, we'll talk more in terms of the behavioral safety element, in terms of monitoring safe, unsafe conditions. And the terminology also changed there from safe versus unsafe to substandard versus where we looked at we had all these standards, standard operating procedures, etc. So why were there still gaps? So we have a big push in safety to write up a lot of controls. And I'm coming back to the pandemic COVID-19 scenario. And Fabian and I had a discussion, Warren Manning and I have been discussing this in length, and a number of other safety professionals, in terms of our conditional controls exist. So why are we going through this major change in terms of redeveloping? And this is key for one of the discussions I think Fabian is trying to schedule for next week. And we'll be getting on board a lot of key areas in terms of what is working, and if it's not working, what's the reason for it not working. And this came up big when we did our periodic audits, our gap assessments in our work sites. And when I'm talking on this, I'm talking also because in the Middle East, on 3 or 4 essential projects, we have workforce, a large workforce still working under the pandemic scenarios. So it is possible to manage projects using your existing controls, your existing processes, but mainly focusing on areas that require tweaking and improvement. So for example, when I come back to conditions that are unsafe, I'm not redesigning my whole system. My health and safety policy is there. I then look at, from my health and safety policy, where do I need to improve? Now, I know from recent discussions on Facebook, some consultants are calling for a whole revamp of policies, risk assessments, etc. And we need to be careful that we don't duplicate stuff. We also don't fall into the trap of not using our current safety drivers to drive the message home. And on this, and it's very important to note that you're going to get, and I'm moving to onboarding, you're going to get a lot of new people coming into the workplace. And when I say new, I mean people that have been off-site for 40 days, 50 days, 60 days. For me, they are new. They are treated new, but they are treated new in a different way. They are treated new because we need to leverage off the opportunities to engage them in our onboarding practices. And from the experience over the last, I would say, 2 months, we've seen that the screening, the review process of the formal training, it's changed there. We've moved off from long classrooms of PowerPoint. We've created more facilities where there's a two-way process of communication. We've also brought in medical HR to the onboarding process, which for me, there was a major gap in that everybody looked at safety, and I'm going to repeat this, we look at safety as now, especially in our current scenario, as the go-to guy or go-to lady, and no disrespect to our females, but all safety professionals now are under the spotlight. But we have a bigger team than just the safety professionals. We need to utilize them, we need to engage them, and we need to ensure that the onboarding practices are inclusive of not just the management team, but of the workforce as well. A lot of our workforce are going through psychological challenges. We need to include psychological safety in our processes. And one of the key parts there is for example, on projects, you have a migrant workforce. So how are you accommodating in terms of the communication network, sustaining the openness in terms of sharing fears, developing charters in terms of accommodation facilities, and not just implementing these robust pandemic planning tools that are not user-friendly, as we've seen now with various lockdown issues and in a number of countries. And then just on the onboarding practices, what we did do is we looked at from our knowledge retention, from our supervisor, our leadership, we engaged our leadership to give a commitment talk, leadership talk at the onboarding. So in your orientation programs, in your workshops, it's good that you get a leader to actually kick off the onboarding process. Or even now when we do the COVID-19 startup, it mustn't be done by the HSE professional. You allowed there for maybe some input, but let the leaders lead. Let them also be given a chance to be part of the onboarding process, to be part of the discussions and part of the change. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the knowledge skill building activities. One of the key parts here was the supervisory safety coaching, where, as I mentioned previously, our supervisors are on board or brought on board because of friend, they know somebody within the system, they are family members, or they have worked for a company for a long period. They somehow know the job, but they don't have the tools for the job. And in safety, and I want to use the word occupational health and safety, they were not given the coaching for this job. And this is where the safety professional comes in. So as a safety professional, we focused on coaching and mentoring the supervisors, but they also coached and mentored us. So for example, on one of the projects, the PMT had a very lean HSE team. The EPC had a very large safety team, and it actually filtered down to the various levels. And we used this opportunity where we actually had area leadership team set up. And because of the results of knowledge retention, we didn't want to make our supervisors feel inferior. So supervisors were grouped with safety teams, and they basically coached each other. So I learned, for example, on rigging. I learned on, in terms of structural steel. I learned on electrical safety. But I was also given an opportunity to mentor and coach some of the leadership, some of the supervisors. So as a senior leadership HSE advisor, I wasn't just left to do the work and coach leadership. I also went to the grassroots, to the ground, put boots on the ground, and I spent a lot of my time mentoring, sharing my knowledge. And I think, Fabian, this is an important part for us over the next coming months, and maybe in the next few years, where we actually are sharing the information. And I think we mentioned it this morning. It's not going to be like a freebie, but one, we need the sweat from the safety professionals to also have some type of workload, and we balance out improving the knowledge. On the skills side, we were also shocked when we looked at the skills and the gaps around skills. And this comes back also if you look at skills levels in South Africa. So it's a discussion I've had on numerous occasions in terms of what are our current skills percentages. So when you look at artisan level, how many people are trade tested? I know trade testing was done away with some time back, but how many of our artisans are skilled? We had some major issues around skills in terms of, and when I look at just some of the big hitters. So one was scaffolding, around scaffolding. And when we dug deeper into our indicators in terms of incidents that occurred with scaffolding, we found that training was not consistent. We found, because there was this large labor pool that was required, there was a cut or gap in the way training was done, and the way the various required scaffold, the levels of scaffolders, there was a gap in there. So they were basically put through fast track training. So we needed to come up with metrics. We need to look at how we'll actually track that from an area leadership point of view. The second one was around truck operators. So one of the biggest issues is in terms of skill building. If a guy has a license, he's actually allowed to drive equipment and trucks. But if you look at buses, what type of training do you need for a truck driver? What type of training do you need for a bus driver? They are carrying normally, and an example we had was around buses, was they carried our workforce, our most valuable asset to the project, but we weren't looking properly at driver skills. We weren't looking at going beyond just the license. We weren't looking at defensive driving tactics, coaching and mentoring our drivers in terms of if a driver has poor visibility, and it's digging deeper into what caused accidents and then preventing them from happening again. Next, Fabian. Okay, as I mentioned, we basically were talking today on the first metric, which is safety drivers. But I added in the 2 slides which spoke on safety culture, and this is the second level of leading indicators. And why I added it for today's discussion is a lot of us as safety professionals, we have this common definition of safety. Safety first, don't get hurt. But what if we look differently and we looked at a common definition as safety as knowing the risks? When a worker understands the risks, they appreciate why they need to work in the environment. Knowing the precautions to minimize or control the risks, and why is it necessary to regularly take those precautions? So in this, and I'm coming back to COVID-19, in terms of it's working with us now in a number of projects. We were alarmed at the understanding of personal hygiene. And I know there's been a lot of jokes around washing your hands. But we weren't even providing facilities, although from a legal point of view, you have the OSH Act, you have OSHA, you have the Qatar Construction Specifications, QCS. We weren't actually meeting the standard. It took the pandemic for us to look at, hey, what are the risks? And that's why when I started, I said it's important for us not to create this panic of reinventing. It's important for us to step back and say, hey guys, what are the risks that we're now exposed to? So using our same systems, we managed to implement a faster process changes, and that allowed us to focus on those areas. So we didn't spend time trying to change the world. We were allowed an opportunity to focus, tap into those areas where we have the significant gaps. And thank you, Joe, for that. The other area was this engagement of knowing the precautions, and the knowing came from actually dialogue with workers, with our supervision and leadership teams. And I'm using the current areas in terms of the pandemic, where we need to start engaging more in terms of, and I look at the areas in terms of supermarkets, calling them essential services, where it took us such a long time just to gear up in terms of what's required, where we should have had this knowledge based. If we tapped into our pool, our workforce, if we went to their levels and asked them, you know, where are areas that we need to improve? And lastly, in terms of regularly doing checks in terms of those precautions. And it saddens in me to look at the number of quick fix programs that are being developed almost overnight in terms of trying to change a culture also overnight. And we must remember it's going to take us a while. We must ensure that all are inclusive of this in terms of why we need to regularly do what's needed. And only then will we actually have that influence around our safety culture. So by me standing up in meetings, by me doing all the work, changing risk assessments, writing an HSE policy or a COVID policy, by me writing out an SOP without buying those precautions are just going to be another piece of paper. And it's not going to add value to the culture. Next, Fabian. And lastly, in terms of don't confuse common practice with culture. Culture is invisible, while common practice is observable. So in terms of culture, and for my previous slide, cultures you'll actually see it in some organizations that are resilient, where they basically have a business continuity model. They're working from home. They've implemented basically strong cybersecurity networks. They've looked at psychological safety, not just safety. They've looked at occupational safety. They've looked at the health and well-being of workers. This is your culture. Common practices and largely common practices is an area that we need to look at and share more insight, because on common practices, we've been derailed by behavior-based safety programs. And it's a topic that's very close to me in terms of the way we do business around behavior-based safety programs. We were actually developing a program, an interactive program on behavior-based safety programs. The other area around common practices was around the last-minute risk assessment. And those are discussions I'd like to have at another time, if it permits us, Fabian. So with that, it's my time is 1:45, so it's 11:45. Fabian, I think it's 2 questions now. Yep. So Fabian, I don't know if you want to come in.
Sorry, man, I was just exiting the screen share there. Thank you again, Saide. Thank you very much for excellent presentation and information that was shared. We'll open it up now for any questions and answers, please. If we can go by raising our hands, and then I will acknowledge you, and then I'll direct the question to Saide. Any questions?
Fabian.
Any statements? Hi, Joseph.
Fabian, can
go
I
ahead.
ask Mansur a question?
Yes, you may.
We have challenges. All of us have challenges with regards to doing our job as safety practitioners. If we can open a forum, almost everyone has a story of how it has not been easy to discharge their duties. I wanted to find out from Mansur if he has dealt with a difficult project manager, and how did he overcome the situation. I know he should have a lot of experience in the Middle East. I'm sitting in the Middle East. The experience is just something else. How do you deal with a difficult project manager, because he's the senior guy, and anything you talk about leadership, supervisors, and they take every little word that comes from him.
Can I respond, Fabian?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's Joseph, eh? Joseph?
Yes, it's Joseph.
Yeah, hi, Joseph. Joseph,
Hi.
thank you. This is a very key point, yeah? And for me, it's one of the most challenging jobs we all have as safety professionals, getting leadership buy-in. And we are sometimes the biggest culprits because we haven't created an inclusive environment. We basically worked for a long period on our own and started producing results for management, which allowed them to actually take a back seat. From experience, working with I won't say a challenging project leadership team or project manager, but work on his weaknesses. So the more he challenges you, rather than challenging him back, respond in a positive way. And it's worked for me, not just in the Middle East, it's worked for me throughout my career, where you didn't get buy-in, but slowly you provided them with information and they saw what the return of investment was on HSE. This is very crucial. And it goes back to one of my colleagues. He shared a story with me in terms of their management was very negative in terms of spending money. Okay, and anything that came up to safety was a no-no. There were questions from HR, there were questions from financial teams. So your project manager or project director or senior manager is influenced by these influences. So you need to look at how do you become an influencer of change to the other project management team members. So that's why I say what's very important as a safety practitioner, I need to also understand a bit of HR. I don't need to know all of HR, but I need to understand the fundamentals, the basics of HR. I need to understand a bit of financial management on projects, if I'm dealing with projects. I need to also understand contracts. What's the contract language? Because a lot of our project managers are driven by project management language. They're driven by the contracts. And if I'm only pushing a safety line, there's going to be a gap. And then I would also use the current COVID-19 pandemic situation as an advantage. And I won't lead it, but I would use it in terms of being the influencer, being the guy that brings people to the table and not trying to do it yourself, but bring the various HR, planning department, project schedulers to the table and have this type of brainstorming discussions in terms of impacts. Our project risks, what changes are we seeing in our project risks? You'll know also in the Middle East, we have a number of issues. One, we're going into the summer season, so we have heat stress. We have social distancing with COVID-19. We have PPE that we have to supply. How do we do all this and still maintain our project schedule? Okay. Yeah, we also have another issue though, in terms of predominantly during the heat season, workers were pushed into areas inside the buildings. So instead of shutting down the work, they did risk management, they put proper ventilation, and were able to do a lot of the work internally. So how has this changed with COVID-19? And these are the discussions you can bring to the table. I'm more than happy to share some of the experience I have and what I've done with some of the project teams. And if there's anything that you need, by all means, Fabian has my email. I'll share it with you as well. At any time, give me a WhatsApp message and we're more than welcome to help you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any
other?
Sorry, Joseph. And remember, it's a journey.
Yes.
It's not an overnight thing. And and I'd like us to say that in our profession, it's a journey.
It's a journey.
The challenging guy that we have to convince is part of our journey.
Thank you very much.
That's so true. That's so
Pleasure.
true. I mean, I think we've all experienced that as well. Because at almost every site you work on, you have a different person that you see as your challenge to sell them over or convince them over to HSE. And when you finally get that right, it's an achievement in itself, and you feel good about it. I've seen so many site managers and project managers that when you first start with them, they're so negative towards safety, and you're always bumping heads with them. But at the end, when they see the light and you actually sit back and see that they see the light themselves, it's really a good feeling within yourself, knowing that you won these people over to be on your side, let's say.
And Fabian, this is true because you find teams are made up of different levels of people. They have, I always use, wherever I am, I use whatever sport is
Prevalent.
Yeah, so a lot of the guys I talk about cricket, and especially if I'm tackling guys from Bangladesh or India, some South Africans, and I use the team makeup. So I can be an excellent batsman, but I'm a horrible fielder, or I can be the best fast bowler or spin bowler, but I'm useless in the field. But this is why you call it a team.
Yes.
And as a safety professional, and this is all leading into these leading indicators, where we were so used of only looking at what we were taught, we didn't go outside of the box.
Yeah.
And this is what more important we need now with the challenges we are faced with now.
That's so true. So true. Are there any other questions for Saide or for anyone else, or any statements you'd like to make relating to this topic? Please feel free.
Hi, Vernon, Fabian, and others.
Hi, Stephen.
Stephen from Mozambique.
Hi, Stephen.
Oh, bom dia.
Bom dia, como está?
Tá bom, obrigado.
Okay, obrigado. Okay, just a bit on the response measures, maybe a bit off the topic, but on the response measures, I wanted to know, like you guys, what do you have in place? Let's say one is detected to have or some symptoms of COVID. What actions do you have in place? Like what to do? What's the next step? For example, here we've got all these thermometers. We are testing our guys. We were doing a lot of, control measures put in place. But in a case like we have detected somebody has got fever, what's the next steps taken to avoid even panic with other employees?
Can I respond there?
Yes, please.
So very important is in terms of testing.
Yes.
Testing is part of a very key element in terms of World Health Organization. I think also have come up with a criteria list. So for example, and I'm just going to start off in terms of December, January. We had a number of learnings coming out of China in terms of the symptoms that presented before people were hospitalized, etc. One of the symptoms was this high fever. And as a symptom, one, I have to look at the history of the individual. So before I even go into testing, yes, I need to do a basic breakdown of my workforce. So if I'm in a factory environment, if yes, I'm in a construction environment, I need to look at the dynamics of, for example, those people that are 55 and older, those people with pre-existing medical conditions, chronic people, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Those people that are on medication. And those are the type of people that I'm going to be placing more focus on. But I'm also going to be looking at, and coming now to your screening part, what screening and how effective is my screening? So for example, and this happened to me a number of times where I was at site, it was a very humid day. And if I did my screening, I would have high numbers, yeah.
Yep.
So you don't want to set these alarms bells off. So it's a frequent screening. So for example, guys are at the camps or they entering site, I do screening. So this guy is at a very different level. I then spend money on, and I'm coming back to this area leadership team concept where I take my factory, I take my project sites, and I break them into manageable chunks.
Yes.
And I screen in those areas. So for example, there's guys that are driving or operating cranes, machinery, equipment.
Yes.
Those are my top level exposure areas. So I need to screen those. There are also some activities where people are going to be working where you cannot have social distancing. So whoever tells me they're going to have a tiler or a bricklayer or somebody that's going to work 2 meters or a meter apart, they're joking,
Yes.
right? So those guys I'm also going to be screening, because if a guy presents symptoms, and that's the screening part, there are symptoms, and I have a checklist. I don't know if you guys have seen this medical checklist, and that's where you'll find guys are quarantined at home or they are hospital quarantine. So there's a different level or stage of exposure based on screening and testing. So I've screened somebody, they present a high temperature. I allow them into maybe my medical or first aid facility to calm down, cool down. I check what activities, I record what they have been doing. And then maybe in another 15 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I do another test. Okay. So it's not a once-off, and this is the gap around screening. We tend to look at screening as a guy comes to work, he gets screened and he goes. But he's in an environment that's dynamic, that's changing. So our processes of screening must also be dynamic. And we mustn't fool ourselves into thinking that we've screened somebody and it's okay. Okay? We must screen them knowing that we're still exposed. Like how we manage safety, the risk and the exposures are there, right? How did we mitigate it? We mitigated X. Is it working? Who's checking if it's working? And that's another gap and we've picked it up now where everyone became so focused over the last, I would say 2 months around screening, health checks, that we lost sight with the other important part of OHS. So we've done a 360. In the past, we were very focused on safety. Now we focused on occupational health, where we should still be focused on that, OHS, occupational health and safety. And then lastly, in terms of screening, understanding and I know from my experience in Mozambique, the guys also live in far out areas. So in my labor force, I need to understand the dynamics. Does the guy stay in Chai Chai? Does he stay in Maputo itself? Does he stay in another area? And how does he travel? How does he commute? What's his condition of his home? And this is why I'm saying HR plays a major part in this. I hope that answers.
So In my case, it's a bit tricky. Like I'm in the transport and logistic industry. And the company where I am now, we've been deemed as an essential service. So we are doing cross-border. So I've got restrictions with the, because like in Mozambique, we're at level 3, which is a state of emergency. So the restrictions to movement and agglomeration, all these things, such social distancing. But our trucks are moving from here. They go to Malawi, they go to Zimbabwe, they go to Zambia, and others, they come from as far as DRC. So you find out all these countries are prone to this COVID-19, and some have got lockdowns, for example, in Zimbabwe, but we have been deemed the essential service. So these guys, they pass through there. So we don't get such strict screening as others are doing. Aside, for example, those booths where we can spray, but what we're doing is just putting the minimum requirements. For example, this screening using the thermometer. So driver comes from wherever he comes, he just get tested, then he passes through and does his papers and take the truck, he goes to the port and take a load and going back. So for me, it's a bit of a challenge where we don't have that proper screening where at any time we are prone to such an issue where we can have somebody positive. And currently Beta also is not testing, so somebody has to be sent to Maputo. I mean, the test samples have to send to Maputo and all that stuff. So it's a big challenge for me.
No, I think it's not just only in the transportation sector. So for you, I would look at 2 scenarios. One, I'd look at my traffic management. I don't know if you have a current traffic management risk assessment.
Yes.
So I'd look at that. I then mark out the hotspot areas. So within various countries, you'd actually mark out significant challenged areas that your driver would have to go in. And using the OSHA pyramid, you'd basically move the category of, and I will share this with Fabian, he can share it with you guys, is you then put your driver into another risk category. So you've elevated him from maybe a low to a medium, and depending on the zones that he's actually going into, he'd go into another category then after that. What you have to be careful also with is the driving areas in terms of the medical screening. So drivers or operators should go through a more regular screening. And this comes to another key question in terms of cost. And Fabian and I were talking about this morning. All this is cost.
Yeah.
So we need to look and also in terms of sitting with our financial teams and understanding the cost impact. So for example, on transportation, you have a break even. So for example, if I'm sending a truck to Lesotho or Beira or one of those places, it's going to cost me X amount.
Yes.
But if I put in the COVID requirements, it's going to cost me X amount. And having this dialogue with your clients, they need to understand it. So I'm not going to put my driver and his assistant at risk. I'm going to make sure that those costs are somehow incorporated. And these are the discussions we need to be having in terms of, hey guys, transportation is going to cost us. Although fuel is dropped in parts of the world, the transportation costs of the fuel is now going to be absorbed into medical costs.
Okay.
And if you don't mind, whatever you need again, share it with Fabian and I would give it a look over. And then I have, in terms of traffic management, crisis management programs, which you can then try and implement within your organization.
Sure, thanks. I
Thank you.
appreciate. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
gentlemen.
so
I
much.
see.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Warren's hand's been up for a while. I think we can just go to Warren and then we can close the session. Thanks, everybody. Warren, you can go ahead.
Greetings all. Saide, yeah, I think we could spend a weekend, sucking the marrow out of your presentation. I think in the safety profession, you guys know I'm very hard. I'm actually very grumpy, aging in a very bad way. We're not getting the marrow. We're not sucking the marrow. We being fed a lot of scraps in terms of the science and the art and the passion, of what OSH is all about. And those of us who come from the other side of the road, have a different life experience on why OSH exists and who OSH is for and who owns OSH, So just the one thing that keeps striking me, your emphasis on learning, on being honest about what you didn't know and what you all had to learn. A big chunk of this presentation was about your own learning as a professional. And that's refreshing. I mean, one hardly ever hears notables say what they didn't know and how they had to learn and how they had to leverage off other people's knowledge, skills, sets and so forth. And I mean, in terms of working people, the knowledge they hold is not respected. I mean, imagine if one had to do an honest recognition of prior learning assessment of the workplace in South Africa, what salary scale general laborers would be sitting at. I mean, there are people that have got decades of experience that are still termed as unskilled labor. It's a justice issue that we have to carry through in our work as OSH practitioners, and it touches down when we evaluate work plans and generate safety protocols with the teams.
Yes.
With the teams like the DSTIs. That's a with team. And even the toolbox talks, that's with the team coming up with, guys, this is what we face.
Yeah.
Well, how do we deal with it? How do we buy in? How do we put our hands together and say, we in this team together, we know what we're doing. We commit to each other, And so I found that there's a standout that I would just like to emphasize is that there's a wealth of knowledge that it's ignored on the lower level of the pyramid in the workplace for so many historic reasons in this country, and it stands in the way of us moving OSH forward. But I know I would be seeking matter out of the days to come. Thanks, so I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Warren, just on a key point there in terms of learning, it's important for all of us to understand that our learning never ends. So, and this was pointed out to me by one of my strong mentors, Jack Tolman from the US. He encouraged me, and we started this discussion when he visited one of the projects. We were doing a site walk, and I was asking him, what can I do to further my continuous professional development? And the guy stopped at me and he was a bit shocked. And he says, but why would you still want to learn? And this was a trick question, by the way, which he later confided in me. He wanted to just test me. And he was overwhelmed. I was then given the opportunity to fly to America to do, and this was for free, to do an ExxonMobil safety advisor program. Now, if you don't show others that you don't know everything, you won't be given these opportunities. And it comes back to also my earlier career in safety. I owe a lot to a guy by the name of Dries Niemand, who during the time of very, I would say, a very confused political system, there was this white guy that gave me training that I still value today. and not just book training, but in terms of mentoring, coaching others, supporting others. And one of the key parts was getting projects that were horrible. So nobody wanted to go to Richards Bay Smelter. I went to Richards Bay Smelter. Nobody wanted to go to Cecil to do some Synfuels work on the revamp or in the reactors. I went. And this provided training and insight into working, and you raised it or hit it on the head. There are so many guys from our workforce that have more knowledge than we have. We need to tap into that knowledge. And we need to also move away from, I don't like the word toolbox talk. It's an old term that was not allowing us to have two-way communication. The tools like the TSTI, DSTI, the last minute risk assessment approach, and these are tools that promote two-way communication. They promote listening, they promote learning. And we as professionals now need to start looking at what tools we used, did they add value? And it's coming back to the discussion around traffic management, around transportation, around health screening. What are we learning? How are we sharing these learnings? And because a lot of us are repeating the same mistakes over and over without learning. Finally, the marrow. And what is the marrow? It's important that we start putting actions in place soon in terms of not just sucking out the marrow, but making sure the marrow is shared with all. We changed the dynamics, and I wrote on one of my posts on Facebook about the chessboard or the monopoly board. We need to restructure the game and have an inclusive game where we take the lead now, where we look at, in terms of research, and Fabian, I hope you're listening, in terms of research projects, key for us is we're not doing enough of our own research. Large parts of our research are based on UK, they're based on America. I did have this discussion with Fabian as well in terms of how are we gearing up our safety professionals for the international market. It's time now where we create this change. The stop talking, as Warren mentioned, very important. We have a massive pool of data, statistics, even knowledge. But if we're not taking it to the next level, if we're not equipping ourselves and others with this, it's only going to be left back in the shelves. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Said, once again. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. The next one is starting in the next few minutes. Will be Ben Bailiffeld discussing DSTI and toolbox talk discussions and how they relate to each other. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.